ESS, Biodiversity Conservation Part 5, is the second of two movies on the impact of people on the Earth's biodiversity. The significant idea is, while global biodiversity is difficult to quantify, it is decreasing rapidly due to human activity. Classification of species conservation status can provide a useful tool in the conservation of biodiversity. Here is the outline for the biodiversity conservation movies. Use this slide to find the movie you need for review purposes. This movie is focused here. Here are the first two IB syllabus statements that kick off this movie. Describe the human activities that cause species extinctions. Describe the human activities that lead to a loss of biodiversity. The acronym used to help remember the 5 impacts of humans on the world's biodiversity is H.I.P.P.O. Habitat destruction, invasive species, human population growth, pollution, and overharvesting and hunting. This movie will look at human population growth, pollution, and overharvesting and hunting as the activities that reduce Earth's biodiversity. Let's start with population growth. 7.4 billion people take huge quantities of resources for themselves. Humans consume 50% of the world's net primary productivity. In this photo of New York City, there is hardly any nature other than a human one. Humans have altered the landscape and reduced diversity as compared to the original habitat. Here is a photo of the Earth at night. You can see the densely populated areas, and you can see the areas where there are very few lights. The lights are a sign of people, but also a sign of the uneven distribution of resources. People living here in Central Africa do not have access to the same resources as those living in New York City. People require food, and our food production systems have disrupted many ecosystems. As the population continues to grow, we will need more food, and some people consume more than others because they eat higher in the food chain. The high density of people in certain countries puts pressure on resources, particularly natural ecosystems. People can choose their level of resource consumption. We could choose to consume less. In consuming less, we might better protect natural ecosystems. When you look at a photo such as this one of Hong Kong, it's a wonder where all the resources come from to support all of these people. Resources come from nature located somewhere outside this city. The human need for resources will disrupt natural ecosystems. A large population of humans requires even more resources. What happens to the habitats that supply resources to the cities? What was the habitat of this location before people arrived? With technology, people can live in locations they might not otherwise live in. And with technology, people can live in high-density populations like Las Vegas or Dubai or Abu Dhabi. Deserts have low productivity, far too low to support the high density of people in these cities. The resources for the people in Las Vegas must be harvested from other locations and moved great distances. Agricultural areas have a beauty about them, but the presence of people is evident in this photo of landscape in Ontario, Canada. What was the habitat before the humans exploited it to grow food? Humans disrupt habitats in growing food. On our industrial farms, we have monocultures and non-native species. As well, the native habitat has been altered. Population growth increases the pressure on natural ecosystems. You can see small patches of native habitat in this photo of farmland in Switzerland, but the presence of people having altered the landscape to grow food is evident. This is a beautiful photo of rice production in China, but don't lose sight of how people have manipulated the land and disrupted natural ecosystems to grow their food. What was the diversity of the ecosystem that existed before people arrived? And what's the diversity now? Mangrove forests have been removed to build shrimp farms to provide food for people. What are the shrimp eating in these farms? Is it fish meal made from fish harvested from the ocean? How energy efficient is shrimp farming? Could people choose to eat differently? Eating higher in the food chain is energetically inefficient. For those who eat meat, there is a larger consumption of available resources. In this photo of a feedlot in Idaho, think carefully about the impact people are having on the world's diversity when they eat meat. Now let's look at pollution and its impact on natural ecosystems on Earth. Ecosystems have been disrupted by pollution. The ocean is full of plastic, and while plastic negatively impacts the aesthetics of a beach, plastics are finding their way into the food chain because many animals find the colors of small plastic pieces to resemble their food source. Animals are eating plastic. Plastics harm organisms directly, as you can see in this photo, and I also want you to consider how toxic molecules can biomagnify through the food chain. Plastic disrupts ecosystems by harming organisms directly, as you can see in these photos. You can see plastic in the gut of this dead bird. Moving away from plastic, here's an annotated photo showing the extent of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico in 2010. The oil itself and the chemicals used to break down the oil disrupted ecosystems. Here are images of organisms harmed by an oil spill. People dump sewage into rivers, and the high organic load of sewage causes significant change to the water chemistry. Bacteria bloom, consuming oxygen, thus reducing the oxygen in the water. The water becomes anoxic, unable to support life. The process I've just described is called eutrophication. New technology called hydraulic fracturing, or for short hydrofracking, or shorter still just fracking, extracts natural gas from underground rock. But the chemicals used in hydrofracking are having a detrimental effect on the health of people. And then, as we pollute our waterways, from where do we get our fresh water? And what was the diversity of the pristine waterway before people arrived and polluted it? What is the diversity of the species in this body of water today? Spills of toxic molecules, such as this one in Colorado, disrupts ecosystems, reducing biodiversity. And air pollution disrupts ecosystems as well. Acidic rainfall or urban smog harms ecosystems downwind. Direct exposure to the pollutants causes harm. Why would birds, insects, or other animals tolerate pollution better than people? Well, they don't. Biodiversity is reduced by air pollution. Here is a photo of air pollution in China in 2006. And then there's climate change caused by the release of carbon dioxide from the combustion of fossil fuels. In this graph, you can see an overall rise in temperature over a 140-year period. Many natural ecosystems are already being disrupted by climate change. Coral reefs are being bleached by the warmer water and the acidification of the ocean. As the Earth warms, species adapted to particular temperatures will need to shift poleward to survive. And here's a graph displaying the global average temperature change relative to the 1961-1990 average. You can see the rising average temperature of the Earth in this line. Species will need to shift poleward or go extinct. More violent weather could put pressure on species with small numbers of individuals or species that are narrowly distributed. And now, the last of the 5 major impacts of people on the Earth's species: overharvesting and overhunting. I've presented some of these ideas earlier in the movie. Improved technologies for harvesting food has resulted in the decline of many of the world's species. The Atlantic bluefin tuna stocks are in desperate need of protection, but the world governing bodies will not act to protect the tuna because the tuna is so important to Japanese culture. With modern trawlers and massive nets, the rate of harvest of ocean fish far exceeds the rate of replacement. Reproductive rates of fishes cannot keep up with the rate at which people remove fish from the ocean. The demand for food, including fish, results from the size of the human population, a human population which continues to grow. People harvest 50% of the world's net primary productivity, and this threatens species. This photo shows a monoculture of corn. The original prairie habitat is no longer. This photo clearly displays the political boundary between Haiti on the left and Dominican Republic on the right. You can see the overharvesting of forest in Haiti, whereas the government of Dominican Republic has instituted greater conservation measures. Thus, overharvesting is not as severe as it is in Haiti, where there is very little regulation. Clearly, 1/2 of the world's remaining tropical forests will be gone in less than 100 years. Overharvesting should include eating higher on the food chain. Harvesting higher on the food chain is less energetically efficient. This reduces resources and threatens native habitats. People alter habitats to provide food for themselves. Markets are full of food, often grown great distances from the market itself. People in more economically developed countries expect to have fresh tropical fruits available to them in the middle of the winter. Lots of people requires lots of food, high technology, and results in many disrupted habitats. Where was all of this food produced? And what was the original ecosystem before the arrival of people? As you think about the overharvesting of food, consider the following. Economics. People who are poor can only think in the short term. They cannot worry about the environment when the health and safety of their family is at stake today. People who are affluent tend to consume far more than necessary. Per capita consumption is high among people in more economically developed countries, and this overconsumption of resource puts added pressure on ecosystems. Let's consider ecology. Is the biome productive like tropical rainforests? If so, the biome can support more people. Is the biome less productive? If so, it cannot support many people. By virtue of overharvesting, is the landscape harmed, desertified, degraded? Let's consider technology. If technology allows people to harvest at rates higher than rate of replacement, the negative consequences for the Earth's species are higher. And lastly, let's consider the socio-political. How do we manage population growth? How do individual governments manage population growth? What are the cultural issues in terms of the status of women in society, in terms of managing contraception and education? There are many environmental issues: habitat loss, overfishing, pollution, and climate change. But the root cause of all environmental problems are these: population growth, human population growth, rising resource use, in other words, per capita resource use, affluence, no environmental accounting, in other words, we are not pricing resources to account for waste or pricing them to account for the pollution that comes from the use of those resources. And lastly, poverty. People who are poor cannot worry about the long-term health of the environment when they are worried about feeding their family today. Let's look at some of these basic causes of environmental problems. In this graph, you can see the exponential growth in the human population that's occurred in the last 200 to 300 years. Increasing numbers of people put pressure on resources, threatening ecosystems. People need food, water, and shelter. Rising resource use. These agricultural fields are being grown in a desert biome. Water is required. The water is drawn from deep aquifers underground. Rising affluence and an increased demand for food puts pressure on resources. And with technology, our rate of harvest of resource often exceeds the natural rate of replacement. the stocks or the storages of resources decline over time. And we pollute commonly held resources like air without any environmental accounting. We need to price fossil fuels to include the cost of cleaning up the pollution. We should not be allowed to pollute air or water, these are commonly held resources, without paying the cost. People use rivers, natural aquatic ecosystems, as the drain for their sewage. We should pay the cost of polluting the river. But can people who are poor care about environmentalism, care about biodiversity? Poverty contributes to environmental degradation. If one is worried about the next meal, how can one be worried about protecting the environment? Poverty contributes to environmental degradation. And that brings us to the end of our look at H.I.P.P.O, the 5 large impacts of humans on natural ecosystems. And that brings us to the end of IB ESS Biodiversity Conservation Part 5.